Namaskar and good evening to the viewers of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation. Today we are in our 67th episode of Reflections celebrating 100 years of Bharat Ratna Pandit Ravi Shankar ji. Friends, before we start the session of today, we would like to pay our homage to the legend Bharat Ratna Pandit Bhimsen Joshi on his 10th death anniversary. Continuing to our show Reflections, today we are having our guest who is from a financial sector to music fraternity and how he curved his way and met with legendary master Bharat Ratna Pandit Ravi Shankar ji. On behalf of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation, I welcome Shree Vibhaker Baxi, Chairman and MD of Nabarun Records Limited, London. Vibhaker ji, namaskar.
Namaskar.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Nice to see you. And it will be a very interesting conversation from you for the viewers. Talking about.
I was just thinking that in this series you had a number of very prominent musicians and disciples of Raviji. So in me, you have somebody the least aware and informed about the music and its technicalities, but more representative of his audience and listeners and lovers of his music in that sense. So I'm filling up another dimension of his life.
No, it was very important for you also to come to the show and talk about and share your memories of Panditji. We have worked a lot with Panditji. And to continue with the conversation with you, as usual, I invite senior disciple of Pandit Ravi Shankar ji, Gaurav Mazumdar.
Namaskar, Vibhaker bhai. Nabarun, namaskar.
Namaskar.
How are you?
Fine.
Vibhaker bhai, I cannot express how happy I am and how honored I am to see you and to be able to speak to you today because we have had such a wonderful relationship over the last so many years.
Indeed.
And I would like all our viewers to know about you, know about your background, and Navras, the beautiful catalog you have, the recording label, and the numerous concerts you have done in England. So where do we begin today?
Well, I guess perhaps the best thing to start is Nabarunji was asking me earlier about how banking to music, how did that happen? And I was just telling him that I was brought up in a family where music was very much part of our life. My father used to play Dilruba, my mother used to sing. One of my uncles was a disciple of Harim Jafar Khan Sahib. So music has been in our family. And from there, it was a question of just being a listener more than a performer in my case. And over the years, I grew up in Africa, so you didn't have that much exposure to Indian classical music. But in the family we had, so that continued. The seeds were there. And then when I finished working overseas in 1985 and came back to UK, having been in the Middle East and Hong Kong and so on, I started attending concerts in London because there was a lot of opportunities of doing that. And during the number of the concerts that I used to attend, there was one individual whose concert somehow took my imagination away because there was something unique about the atmosphere, the ambience, the whole experience. And so I decided I must get to know this guy more. And the person I'm talking about is Jay Vishwadev of Summer Art Network in London. And, I used to see his concerts, and I said to him one time, I said, Jay, I come to your concerts, I really enjoy them. It's very frustrating that you cannot relive this experience. And he said, well, of course you can. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I've recorded all these concerts. So I said, well, then why don't you release them? Anyway, so long story short, then I tried to help him with a lawyer to get the rights organized with the artist. And I said, see if you can get going and if I can be of any help. At that point, Jay was basically the A&R person, the artist person, and he was still doing concerts. And I had an elder brother, Kirit Bakshi, who was an absolute whiz of an engineer. And he had retired because of health reasons early. So I said to him, why don't you, digitize and remaster the analog recordings and start doing something with this catalog. And this is how we started the Nabarun concept. The purpose of this whole thing was that we wanted to bring out live recordings. Because there were many studio recordings that were coming out, so we didn't want to be doing some more of the same thing. And in the process, we decided that our raison d'etre, our specialty, would be to bring out some of the finest concerts. So we would bring the artists, like Jay used to always do, to England from India and Pakistan, present them, and then bring out some of the finest performances that they would like to see come out as well. And that's how we started. And initially we had a very simple distribution model of one or two countries, and then we started to diversify further. And eventually you start growing the catalog, because without that you don't get people to want to pick up your titles to distribute them. And in 1992 we started the Navras company, and in 1995 we actually established an Indian subsidiary operation in Mumbai, because our ultimate aspiration was that our music should reach India from where it came. And because we are very proud of the quality of our recording and the presentation of it, that we felt that there was a place for us in the Indian market, because Indian market, the classical music was not being seriously pursued in a way that it should have been. I remember when I used to come to India to see whether it was for us to start there, I met a number of Indian music companies, and they all tried to put me off, saying, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to come to India for classical music? Don't you know there is no market for this? There is no commercial viability. You're going to just waste your money. And I said, well, yeah, but if I can make this work, it would be good, because we are doing something different. So he said, what? I said, recording and presenting live concerts. He said, I know what you do. You just add the applause at the end of a recording, and that makes it live. And I said, no, it's not so. Anyway, so we were being discouraged to come, and that made me more determined that I must go there. And that's how we started. And then 3 years later, we were approached by Sony Music, who were just established in India, and they didn't have an Indian classical catalog. And they said, we really like your catalog. It's a very prestigious catalog. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Why don't you let us do the marketing for your catalog? And so at that point, we licensed the Navras catalog for the Indian market to Sony Music. And that was in 1998, and it continued for a good 20 years before they eventually came and acquired our catalog and the remaining unpublished archives. So it's now all with them. But so it's been an interesting journey. And, over that period of time, we have published over 300 titles. We have come into a variety of genres: classical, instrumental, vocal, some very unique and rare duets. We have done some fusion work. Some jazz and Indian, some classical and Western classical, a variety of things. We've done a lot of folk music, some Sufi music, Hindu devotional music. We didn't do much South Indian music, I'll be honest, because I always felt in life that you concentrate on what you understand and know best. And there was a lot of publishing of South Indian titles coming, so we didn't do much of that. We've done some interactions between South Indian and North Indian, as your own title with Navras does that, which is a beautiful combination. But that's the background to it, really. And my brother passed away in 2014, and the whole world of music publishing has changed in the last 5-10 years. The physical product is dying. The shops have disappeared. The ability to produce physical stock and sell it become very much of a problem. So the whole model now is based on digital distribution, and so it's been an interesting journey. I eventually gave up my banking career, and I spent more time developing the Navras activity. And it's been a very fulfilling experience, meeting so many artists of such incredible, legendary names, and to see them in practice. Most of the time people see the front end of it. For us to see from behind the scene, it's been a wonderful experience, very enriching experience.
How nice, Vibhaker Bhai. And I have, of course, had the pleasure of working with you, but also have had the pleasure of hearing your albums. They are so wonderfully digitized and mastered and remastered. And also the booklet, the sleeve notes are something to really, it is so beautiful. And so over 300 titles. And how many more still in the archive, which still
more in the archive than what we have released, to be honest with you, because Jay's catalog or Jay's collection of music goes back to early 1980s. And along the way, we also picked up another catalog called Musenalp. It's a Swiss company, which the owner was in very bad physical condition and he wanted to hand over to somebody. So we acquired that catalog, and there are some recordings there also. So we altogether there is a lot of stuff that's still not published, and Sony Music have already released about half a dozen of that, and some more will be coming out in the future. What we also did in conjunction with Sony, we approached the NCPA organization in India, and we said to them, look, you have an amazing collection of artists recordings going back in time, and these recordings must be, put out in public so more and more people can listen. And otherwise, you have to go to their studios and listen to them on a headphone, but it doesn't get across to the larger audience. And I said, some of these things eventually will die because the listeners who are interested will not be there. So we started in conjunction with Sony and ourselves a special collection of NCPA titles, and again they've brought out a few of those, and it's been a very interesting experience doing that.
How wonderful! How wonderful! So nice to know this, Vibhakar Bhai, and I wish you all the best and continued success in bringing such wonderful and fine music to.
Our aspiration was to try to be the Deutsche Grammophon of Indian classical music. That's why we wanted the quality of presentation, both in terms of sleeve notes, artwork, and the music quality had to be aesthetically of the highest standard. And we also decided, because we wanted to appeal to a larger international audience, that our sleeve note must reflect that larger audience and try to explain to them some of the nuances of Indian classical music without becoming too technical so that you lose them in the process. And that is what we try to do by commissioning all kind of people who are in the West who are knowledgeable of Indian classical music, and some of the writers in India as well. And then the next stage, we then went to producing some DVDs as well. And we did some CD-ROMs. We did a CD-ROM and appreciation and understanding of Indian classical music, which I thought was a beautiful project did with somebody in Bangalore. And we also done a Sitar Guru CD-ROM that Pandit Arvind Parikh had done for us. So, we did branch out in as many areas as we could.
How nice, wonderful. Vibhakar Bhai, as you know, 2020 is the centenary year of Bharat Ratna Pandit Ravi Shankar ji, and we have had a wonderful series, Reflections, and today is our 67th episode. What comes to your mind when you hear the name Pandit Ravi Shankar?
Oh, as a child, I used to have classical music albums in 78 RPM records. One of the first albums that I had, or record, 78 RPM record I had, was Panditji's Tilak Sham. And I think the other side of it, if I'm not mistaken, was Nat Bhairav. And that Tilak Sham just caught my imagination because there was something about it that was so unusual. So that was how it started. And then when I started attending concerts, in the early days, he was one of the few artists who was in the Western scene to be presenting concerts. And I would remember this when I was very young. I was probably in my 20s, and there was a concert of Panditji at, I think it was the Barbican Center in the early 80s. And I went there, and it was the first time I actually attended his concert. And on walks to the stage, in those days he was quite young still, and an amazing aura, in his silk kurta and dhoti, with his curly long hair, and the sitar in his hand. He walks there, and I think by the time he gets on the stage, he has already captured you because of that amazing charisma that he had. Before you even start listening, the impact of this presence was just quite mind-blowing. So that was my first experience. And over the years, I used to meet him. I remember when he had been given Bharat Ratna, there was a program at the India House in London to felicitate him, and I met him there. But my first close interaction with Panditji was actually, in fact, when I was in the States one time, and we went and visited him in Encinitas, where he used to live near San Diego. And first time we really got to sit down and talk, and I was there for a few hours with him and Sukanya ji, and I think Lakshmi Shankar was also there. And I had some Tamilian friends in Los Angeles who were driven for the day, and we spent wonderful time talking to him. And the thing that struck you at the time was that he was a man who was an absolute giant of an individual, but he had the ability to treat you no matter who you are in life, not what station you were in. You made you absolutely comfortable, and that he was interested in talking to you. It wasn't like, you should just come here to worship me rather than sort of talk to me. And he was always that kind of person, I found. And that, to me, was a very rare attribute about him, the ability to relate to people at different stations in life. And he was always very outgoing.
Absolutely, and he would be genuinely interested in you and wanting to know what you do and how you do things, and it would always be such a quality he had.
One of the most interesting anecdotes that came about was after we, became familiar with each other in more detail for a while. He then said to me, he said, Bakshi, he said, are you a Nagar community fellow? I said, yes. He said, I had a very, very dear friend called Joshipura, and he is from your community. And he turns to Sukaneji and says, Sukaneji, these Nagar people, they really understand their music. So he was able to relate in that dimension, which I had never expected him to pick that up. But so that was he had a lot of antennas open in different directions.
Very alert, very aware, very informed. And yes, Joshi Puraji was a very dear friend. And for many years, Guruji would be in Bombay and would stay with them in Pedder Road. And they were very close to each other, And genuinely, Guruji, as I said, he would be interested in knowing who you are and your background, and it was always the case with him.
Then, I met him again in Delhi, and Pandit Satish Vyas, who was a consultant to Nabarun Records in India, he and I went to visit him in Delhi again, and that was soon after the visit to California. So that was kind of further consolidated the relationship. And I said to him, I said, my big regret was that Nabarun's catalog had every artist think of, you could imagine, except him. And I said, one day I want to realize this dream that we would be associated. And so, in fact, in 2007, which was the 60th anniversary of Indian independence, we had decided to do an extended concert of Indian classical music. And we were able to persuade him, and we were very privileged to have him to come and perform at that concert. We had about 8-hour extended concert, starting with South Indian music, vocal music, and then instrumental music. So we started off with Dr. Subramaniam and his son. Then we had Kishori Amonkarji and her vocal group, and then Anushka and Panditji after that to finish off what was an amazing event that was probably one of the most prominent concerts for that anniversary of Indian independence in London.
And this was in London or in Birmingham?
It was in London at the Royal Festival Hall, and it was, in fact, the festival hall had been completely redone, and they had completely set up a whole new acoustics and seating. Everything was properly done, and this was the first major concert to take place after that renovation of Royal Festival, in which they spent about 140 million pounds. So it was, in that sense, a very important occasion for this to happen. And so, he came over and spent a week with us. Again, we got to know him much more. And even then, by that time, he was quite frail. And, he was mostly in wheelchair when it came to extensive, mobility and all that. And he was always making you feel like, oh my God, I'm making you all feel so uncomfortable that you have to look after me, you have to do this to me, you have to do that to me. And he was always concerned about the fact that he was putting everybody else out because of his frailty. And it was that consideration that always was something with the hallmark of him.
Absolutely. He was, that was an amazing quality about him, Vibhaker Bhai. And he always made sure that the other person is comfortable and that he's not really,
Well, the ability to digest that is very important, because I know one of the concerts we had, a musician that was performing an instrumental concert, and he said that, you please come and pick me up. It was an all-night concert, and he said, I'm not going to carry my instrument because my nerves and things might be affected. You make sure somebody's there to carry my instrument and take it in the taxi and then bring it out the taxi to the concert hall. And when I see this side of Panditji, what a contrast.
Absolutely. We have some wonderful people watching. Chinama, of course, from London. Sukanyaji is watching.
Hello.
And I'll just, if you allow me a moment, I'll just want to just read out a few comments here. Nisha Chatterji, Nabarun's wife, dear wife, she's saying namaste. Sukanya ji saying namaskar. So happy to have Vibhaker ji today. Uh, then we have Sophia Hoffman watching from Portugal. We have Aditya, who's our technical support. Keith Denmark, my disciple from Chicago, is watching. Naresh, flutist, he's watching. Elizabeth is watching. Satish ji is watching from Bombay, Satish Vyas, and he's saying hello, Vib and Gaurav. Jaivan Naidu from Hyderabad is watching, and Neerav Vaidya is saying namaskar. Jaivan Naidu is saying some of the best recordings of Ustad Bismillah Khan is by Navras Records. And we have Parashar Baxi. We have Neerav Vaidya. Jai Vishwadeva is watching, saying greetings, Vib. You bring all the memories flashing back as you speak. And Sukanya ji saying Tilak Shyam, one of my favorites. And Satish ji saying, I'm nostalgic of my visiting Joshipura house to meet Pandit ji on so many occasions for quite a few years. Girish Chandegra, Krishan Tandon, Prasanna Kumar Saha, Krishna Chakravarti, Guruji's disciple. So a lot of wonderful people are watching. And Satish ji saying, in spite of being the tallest personality in the world, he was so humble and down-to-earth human being. Nandita is watching from Delhi. I'm watching too. Gaurav Mazumdar, she's saying. So yeah, we have some wonderful people watching the show, Vibhaker Bhai.
Thank you very much to all of you for being there. You know, the thing about Raviji that I was just thinking overnight about this thing, and I think often people say that sitar and Ravi Shankar are synonymous. And yes, of course, that is at one level that is true. But I really do think that he was much more than that. As an individual, as an artist, as a musician, he was a much more larger, all-encompassing musician in the sense, sometimes to try and compare two sitar players, didn't do justice to him. Because the universe in which he operated was quite remarkably wide. He was somebody who wanted to explore boundaries, who wanted to reach out to other cultures. He wanted to, within Indian classical music scene, he tried the orchestral thing. He wanted to try ballets. I wanted to try opera music. And, you know, his whole presentation style so that he can actually not put off a foreign audience, but to actually keep them involved in Indian classical music by adapting to it. I think that has changed completely the presentation style of the music concert. I was just reading Oliver's book, and the fact that more and more people now use the carpets, the rugs, the oriental rugs on the stage, it was something that he started. It wasn't being done before that. I mean, a lot of things that one takes for granted about concert presentation was all that was established by him. And I think, therefore, the impact of Pandit Ravi Shankar was not just as a sitar player. He was a complete individual in terms of presentation, style, trying to reach out and explore and not be boxed in to an old culture which didn't want to grow out of it. In the process, he probably faced a lot of criticism and controversies. But I think that the thing is that in life, we become what we are by virtue of fate and destiny. I mean, in his case, he grew up in Europe and he was touring around with Uday Shankar's troupe. So he was exposed to the West. Who is to know, had he been exposed more to Japan or to Middle East, he may have tried to do more crossover work with those musical genres, because there is a lot more there closer to our music than the Western music, which is a huge discrete jump, as it were, from Indian classical to the Western. That is a fundamental difference in the two music systems. But he tried to reach that. And it's always, for me, it's been a fascinating subject, this whole idea of crossover or fusion music. Even in the Navras catalog, when we used to present artists together, I was very conscious of one thing, that the notion of fusion should not be completely distorted. In other words, if you just put a Western musician with their instrument and ask them to play Ragdari music, that doesn't make it a fusion. It could be something more than that. And not many musicians have got that right. Fusion is something much more difficult to achieve in reality. And in the process, there is always going to be a compromise. I mean, I always used to think, could it be possible for an Indian artist to say, pick up work of Mozart or Bach or Beethoven, and start from there and then start improvising from there. And it would be interesting to see that experiment to work. It may cause a lot of problems among the Western people because they might think we are taking liberties with our musicians. But point was that Raviji was fated to be going in that direction because of his past, and therefore he ended up in the West. And when he ended up in the West, the number of people that he met of some amazing musical and artistic background, intellectual background, I mean, all these things are fate and an accident, if you like, from which he was able to do something with it. He was influenced by it. He influenced them in return. And the result was something that we would never have seen that if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have seen that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and how he maneuvered the whole all these meetings and all those events was amazing. That's what amazes me. That at the peak of his career and the kind of people he had already met, some of them in his childhood, like Menuhin, Lord Yudi Menuhin, he met in his childhood when he was with Uday Shankarji in Paris, but also the other musicians he met or personalities he met, the way he defined that friendship, the way he defined that relationship was absolutely amazing.
And in those days when he was performing in Europe, those are the days when you didn't have very large non-resident Indian population, if you like, or the diaspora. So for him to survive in that situation had to be by attracting the British audience or the American audience or so on. It had to really reach out to them rather than bringing in your own people who relatively easily can appreciate what you're trying to do. And I think that was the thing that in the 70s and 80s was the difference in the audience makeup compared to today. Today, you don't see the British audience as much as you see the diaspora audience. And it's a different kind of experience. That one was a much more difficult experience to go through, and he established that base point, as it were, from where there was a wider acknowledgement and coverage of Indian music in the Western media. And I remember reading somewhere here he says that he did not like the word ethnomusicology being used, because he felt, quite rightly in my opinion, that Indian classical music is just as classical as Western classical music. Why should classical music only be the Western classical? Everything else is world or ethno music. And I think he was right for that. But it's a battle that you fight because it's a very Western centric world in which we live. And the fact is that Indian classical music and its history goes way back in time. But at the same time, it is still alive. Beethoven's work is frozen in time. Pandit Ravi Shankar's work is not, and it will continue to evolve with his disciples doing more of it. It continues to be alive and dynamic, and you all as his disciples will continue to grow that message of his. So that's the point that I think he was trying to make.
Absolutely, absolutely, and he did struggle quite a lot to convince and to bring across this beautiful music as a classical art form. As something that's not ethnic music or a folk music, and he really worked very tirelessly patiently to make people understand and appreciate. That was his, I think, greatest contribution.
One thing that really hit me watching one of his DVDs, because he was experimenting so much, people in India would criticize him that he's doing this to get this publicity and get more famous and all that sort of thing. And I remember him saying on camera that after he had gone out to reach in the West, he certainly found that the drug scene and everything else that became associated with Indian classical music had given it the wrong connotation and the wrong message. And he said, I was beginning to wonder whether I'd done something wrong. Where did I go wrong? Why has this become what I never intended it for it to be? Because this is not about drug. It's not about some kind of a entertainment or some kind of a psychological need that you have to reach by having drugs and then listening to music. So here is a man who actually had the humility to question himself, that maybe I shouldn't have done this. Was I wrong? And questioning himself. Now that was something that is not widely recognized. And then he goes on to say, at the same time, he said, I'm really concerned about the future of our own tradition in India, because it's being buffeted by the influence of Western culture and Western ideas. And he said, what we have is very old, very crucial, very important, and it must not be lost. Not just in terms of music, but in the wider culture of India. And he says he's very, very concerned about that. So he was rooted very much within his own culture, even whilst he was experimenting outside. And let me tell you this, Gaurav, this has been my experience. Unless you are rooted, you cannot explore outside without any degree of self-confidence. I mean, I'm a person who was born in India, but I've never lived there pretty much. I grew up in Africa, and I've been in Middle East and Hong Kong and in UK all my life. I have lived and I've had to live and be part of a very cosmopolitan universe. But at the same time, I have not lost my own roots and my own Indianness. And that is the thing that Panditji managed to keep. And his impact was much bigger than somebody like me because of constantly being at the forefront of of this kind of experiences and being buffeted by all kinds of cultures. But he remained rooted. And that allowed him to try to do what he did with confidence.
Absolutely, absolutely, and especially 60s onwards, his journey abroad brought him a lot of more fame. He was already famous when he started traveling abroad. He was already a star in India. He had already worked with Satyajit Ray. He had already done work with Chetan Anand and with filmmakers, and his concerts were all sold out. And the 60s phase did bring a lot of criticism, and as you rightly said, that he really thought very carefully of those the statements and those reviews written by people. And I remember going through his collection of newspaper cuttings in the archive, and he really, from place to place, whether it was Calcutta, whether it was Bombay, he really went deep back in time, going back to his roots and tradition, to convince people that he has not lost it, he has not left it, he has not made a hippie out of himself, but his mission is to bring this beautiful music in its most purest of forms to the whole world and make the world realize what a great music this is.
Yes,
and it took it. He was quite hurt with those. I would say frivolous, and I would say a lot of people writing without really knowing, because they really don't know what he was doing. And there were Vibhaker Bhai just yesterday. I happened to. I mean, you open YouTube, and every second or third day you find a new recording of his. There's no other artist who has been recorded not just by say HMV or any other music label, but also privately recorded. So even though between Sukanya ji and Guruji and his team, they have acquired a lot of private recordings, a lot. One of the largest I still remember, because I was instrumental in getting those recordings from Rajiv Gandhi, our Prime Minister. His passion was to come to Guruji's concerts, sit on stage and record his concerts.
Really? Yes.
So there was a very large collection by Rajiv Gandhi, which he had with him. He would travel with it. He would listen to Guruji all the time. And then when he became very busy being the Prime Minister of India, he gave it to a friend in Delhi. And through that friend, luckily we got. So there's a lot of private recordings, but still there is a lot more which we don't know. And every second, third, fourth day, you hear. So just day before yesterday, I was going through YouTube, and there is a new recording which in the late 50s and early 60s he played. And he played imagine playing starting at 9, 10 in the night till early morning, 6, 7 o'clock. The amount, if you're not really deep rooted, and 60s was a time when he was really busy.
Yes.
But you see the flawless in terms of execution of the rag, the purity of the rag, in bringing out new ideas. It is, all those compositions, he's played Lalit, he's played Basant Mukhari, he has played Bhairavi, he's played a dhun. All these compositions are new. You have not heard them before. So every concert he was really meticulously working towards giving something new to his audience, yet being deep rooted to his.
It was a complete shock to me to find out that Rag Bairagi was actually his creation. I always assumed it was a historic rag going back in time because it had that kind of character to it. You would not think it was conceived in 1940s. And he's created 31 rags, I read from that book, which is amazing creativity. But, the ability to create something that had its root way back in past.
And till date, sometimes, of course, I'm vocal, sometimes I just smile. But till date, people say, no, that's a very old, ancient rag. So I think to myself, wow, that's a compliment, because they are really complimenting his creativity and his creation, that he has created something only in 1949. I mean, it's long time now, but still. And it seems like this raga had always existed. But the fact is, Bairagi, he first conceived the scale, and then he worked on the shrutis, especially the rishabh, and then he worked on the ascending, descending, and the combinations. And then after a long time, I mean, Annapurnaji was there, Guruji played quite a lot, and then finally when he got a shape, they had a brainstorming session, and Guruji said, I want to call it Bairagi. How does that name sound? And she said, you know what? The emotion which it evokes, this scale, is exactly what you're saying, Bairagi. And Guruji started playing, and within no time, musicians like Ustad Amir Khan Sahab, vocalist, instrumentalist, everybody was singing and performing this raga, and the whole of India and the rest of the world later thought it's been an ancient rag, and even singing Guruji's composition.
Yes.
Sachi Surana Gao Kapatatan Chad Atam ko Rijhao. This is a composition. The lyrics are also of Guruji, which was published in the Sangeet magazine way back in 1940s.
And imagine, he was not even 30 years old when he created that.
And he was in his 20s.
Yes.
he was in it. And before that, much before that, he had already created Nat Bhairav. He had already created. He was on the way of creating Tilak Sham and Yaman Maj and so many rags. By his 30s, he had created masterpieces. Imagine 1948. Vibhakar Bhai, he was only 28 years old. The assassination of father of our nation, Gandhiji, and he walking to the studio, and the director coming and telling him that, look, we are sorry, can you play without the tabla, because we are having a national mourning, and if possible, if you can play something special as a tribute to Bapu. So on the spot, he creates with this, just the name of Gandhi, Ga, Ni, Dha, the three notes, and he creates Mohan Kans. And what a beautiful name. What a name. You would think Mohan Khan. So it must be an ancient rag.
Yes.
And he creates this wonderful, and also see his vision later when he released this recording, this rag in an LP, how beautifully he put it together. On one side, it's tribute to Gandhiji, Mohan Khan's, and on the other side, it's tribute to his own Guru, Baba Alauddin Khan, where he has played Baba's rag, Hemant.
Right. Absolutely.
So what creativity, thought, how appropriate his gestures were in terms of how he presented our music, and everything about it, as you just mentioned. It's so
thinking. I mean, the Gani, even to come up with that thing at the spur of the moment requires an overactive mind that is constantly, thinking about what to do, how to relate things, and so on. And
it's just amazing. It's just amazing. I remember another incident. He was playing at the Bhavani Devi temple, and he created this melody, which is Bhavani is an ancient melody of ours. Sama, Dha, only three notes.
Yes.
And he created Bhavani Bhairav. Blended it with Bhairav, and what a beautiful rag Bhavani Bhairav is, Vibhakar Bhai. If ever you get an opportunity, Sukanya ji released a 3 or 4 CD album where all his ragas have been played by his disciples, and most of his, including his tal. You just mentioned India's 50th anniversary. On 50th anniversary, he created a 50-beat tal called Jayanti Tal.
Right.
Swarna Rag, Golden Jubilee, and Jayanti Tal. So he created this melody in a 50-beat time cycle.
Incredible. We used to live in Hong Kong when the movie Gandhi was released. And I remember this. We had gone for the last show of the 9 midnight show in Hong Kong, and as the film was finishing and the credits were coming, everybody started rushing out of the cinema. But we sat through right to the end, and whilst we were sat in the cinema, we could hear somebody singing a song of Lakshmi Ji's Vaishnava Janato, and performing the sort of thing that was being played in the background on the screen. And we looked everywhere, we couldn't find anybody in the audience. And I said, "Who is this?" And all of a sudden, I realized the person who was actually singing was the Chinese usher who was working cleaning up the cinema after everybody left. So I went to him and he said, "Look, I've been watching this thing. I can't get it out of my mind." It was so captured his mind and imagination. And the music of Gandhi was that, particularly the part at the end, was just completely mind-blowing stuff. It really hits you very hard.
Powerful, especially if you remember that scene where they are having the cremation of Gandhiji, and that funeral pyre is burning, and he starts with Mohan Kons there.
Yes.
Beautiful, that Ganida. He starts with that Ganida, and then slowly when his ashes were immersed in the Ganges, it changes to Yaman Kalyan.
Right.
Beautifully, he has changed from Mohan Kons to, and with his own playing, of course, it's absolutely magic. So as you said, I mean, being a mentor, being a guru, a creator, a sitar player, I mean, so many roles he did so beautifully and so perfectly, I would say.
He opened the gateway for Indian artists in the world outside of India, frankly. I mean, because he made that a possibility that people could come abroad and people want to listen to them because they had experienced what that music represented from earlier exposure to Panditji. And I think that all these things we take for granted now, but actually a lot of what he did was something that has benefited so many people in so many ways.
And also, I remember Vibhaker Bhai because I had the great fortune and honor of staying with him. He never missed a moment in introducing us to our great masters. And both these great masters were, of course, many of them were his seniors, but many contemporary musicians. And also many junior musicians. He has taken me to listen to so many of concerts of Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab and Buddhaditya Mukherjee and Shahid Parvez and so many musicians. Kishori ji, one of the best concerts I remember was at Taj Palace, where Kishori ji was singing, and she knew Guruji was going to come. But you know Kishori ji, how she was, how particular she was.
Yes.
She didn't come to the stage for 50 minutes. And why? Because the Tanpura was not getting tuned to her level of perfectness. And she came and met Guruji. She apologized and she said, "Sorry, I couldn't come on stage, Besura, And after that Yaman Kalyan she sang was outstanding, mind-blowing. And also when Guruji created Kinnara in Los Angeles, when he started, the recordings he played was that of Inayat Khasab, Imdad Khasab and Ustad Vilayat Khasab, telling the American people that there is also another style of sitar, there is another gharana of sitar. You all must listen to these as well, apart from listening to me. I'm not the only one. So he was very, very generous, of course, but also very very magnanimous and very open and big about telling people that there is more to this world than just me.
Yes. And I think that is the measure of the man, because of the ability and the confidence in his own ability that he has, that he can feel comfortable to expose his disciples and others to other maestros. And I think, to be honest with you, in the old days of, before my lifetime, that kind of camaraderie was probably more common among the maestros of that time. They were much more open to each other, accessible to each other, and, being involved in that sense. So,
yeah, you might remember because you did so much of work with Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab. So you must, I'm sure you remember having spoken to him, and he must mention so much.
Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab was a very different mindset from Panditji's. He had his approach that you do not mess with tradition, but you innovate within tradition. And that's what he tried to do, in fairness to him. So he had a little bit of a problem with which innovation took it outside of the bounded tradition. But you know what? Both are legitimate ways of looking at things. And if everybody stuck to one area only and nothing else, maybe things will not grow. The essence of both, I think, Hinduism itself and our music is because it is accessible. I mean, look at the Indian film music, for example. We talk about fusion today, but the Hindi film music, now called Bollywood music, long ago was the original fusion.
Yes, and is the best example of fusion.
Yes, perfect.
From the film industry, I always say this: it's a best example of fusion because it's got all the elements of the music from all over the world.
And I'll never forget Jasraji telling me one time, he said, Vibhaker ji, ये लोग जो 3-4-5 मिनट में बात कर देते हम 50 मिनट में नहीं कर सकते.
Correct.
Yes, that was how he had respect for the film industry. I'm not talking about today's film music because that's a different kettle of fish. But that, the 50s and 60s era was just amazing stuff. And so, yeah, there was dynamism, but at the same time, tradition was not necessarily overlooked. But I think some of the things become part of the tradition as we go further out. And I think the Vilayat Khan Sahib's style of playing had its own place and it had its own followers. And, it was, again, very beautiful form of music. And, the Gaikiyang that he created or was influenced in creating was something that was quite unique. I'm glad that we had the option of listening to that. And Pandit's style is a different two styles of listening. In fact, and then Abdul Alim Jafar Khan Sahib is another style of playing too. And so
absolutely, all these styles, they have added so much to the beauty of Indian music and to the sitar. And you have been, of course, you had an exclusive contract with Vilayat Khasa for the last, I think, 5 years of his life, and so much of recording you still have, which is yet unreleased. We are really looking forward to that, Vibhaker bhai.
I used to, at every concert, of course, he would play a Bhairavi, and I would say to him, Khan Sahib, I said, I can't keep releasing your Bhairavi. Can you not play something else? And he got really angry. He said, what do you mean? I play different Bhairavi every time I play. So you are not going to complain about it because each Bhairavi is different. So, again, that was one way of looking at it. Of course, yes, if you listen to any of these Bhairavi one from the other, it'd be different. We were very lucky to have last 4 or 5 years of his life when he moved between UK and India and US, and on the way he would stop by, and we got to go to spend time with him to really get to know him, and get his ideas of what he was thinking about the world, and what he had done. And I think that perhaps he felt that he had not received as much acknowledgement and as much of opportunities in life. And he kind of, I don't think there was anything about personalities here. It was about how the system played one against the other. And that was what I think irked him. And I think that may have always irked him a little bit. But I think, at the end of the day, he was at peace within his own way of playing. And so there was no conflict in that sense. I do remember him talking very, very affectionately about the times when he, in his younger days, had played duets with Panditji and with Ali Akbar Khan Sahib, and so that the three of them together. So that part of it was very much captured in his emotion and thinking, and with great affection.
And they had great respect and love for each other. Yes. I still remember, Vibhaker bhai, there was in '86 when Guruji started having little heart issues, and he was rushed to the US for a bypass surgery, his first bypass. Vilayat Khasa found out about, he got the news from somewhere and he was in Delhi. He drove all the way to Lodi Estate where we were staying with Guruji, and Guruji had already left. And he came and spent almost an hour, 2 hours with us, inquiring about Guruji, and he thought Guruji was still there. So we said, no, he's left. And he left a beautiful letter, handwritten letter. And same with, I remember the last days of Khan Sahib when Vilayat Khasa was in Bombay, ailing, and his last days, Guruji was very restless and very, very upset, and he did call, and finally managed to speak to Shujat Bhai and to Khan Sahib and to Arvind Parekh. So there was a lot of love and respect, and they really loved each other. And I have seen so many concerts with Guruji of Khan Sahib in India. That was absolutely amazing.
Yes, I can imagine. He used to say that now that we are all grown up and we keep traveling so much and we don't see each other as often as we would like to be together, and so the opportunity of the closeness that was there in the early days when they were mostly India bound was not there. But I think that the relationship still remain even from a distance because that never really goes away. Um, and I think that at that level, you talk about Kishori ji and how sometimes she was very fastidious about her way of doing things. And I remember this story about she one time mentioned to Bilal Khan Sahib that he had a tasbih that she was very very keen on. She said, "Can I have this tasbih?" And so he said, "No, I can't give it to you. I have to have this with me." But when he passed away, he had left a message for that to be delivered to Kishore. Now that kind of thing at this big legends level, we don't get to know this unless you get close to them and see this. And I think there was a lot more between Ali Akbar Khan Sahib and Virat Khan Sahib and Panditji, because they did have some interaction in the US as well, because they used to visit there quite a lot. And it's there. And you don't hear that much that being talked about because that doesn't make news, unfortunately. So I think that fact that we were spoiled for choice. We were spoiled for choice for different styles of music, different way of approaching the tradition, and going forward, exploring it further. For me, as I said, coming back to Panditji, for me, I tried to put down a few points, markers, what described to me Pandit Ravi Shankar. And I came up with about 20 to 30, descriptions of him. Like he was a mold breaker, he was a trailblazer, he was an innovator, a restless person who wanted to innovate, a visionary, but he was collaborative. He wanted to collaborate with people from outside of his own milieu, outside of his own culture. It did have to be his own instrument. Even when he was putting the orchestras together, he was collaborative in that sense, and with passion he used it. Always out of the box. Amazing motivator. I remember seeing some of his orchestral work where he's has a wonderful musicians with him like Shiv Kumar Sharma ji and Hari Prasad Chaurasia and all the other major instrumental artists there, and how he's motivating them to come up with a final product that he wanted to see. And he was a risk taker. He did not mind doing something that normally people would not tread into. I mean, all these are very unique characteristics, and that's all this together made him what he was. And not all of us can aspire to have all those things. And he had a natural curiosity about people, about cultures, and about what that meant. And I think the fact that he had a dance background with his brother and so on, that brought in another element into his music in terms of ballet, in terms of opera. So, those are the various things that made him quite different.
Absolutely. There are some more messages, Vibhakar bhai. If you allow, may I read some more messages?
Absolutely.
Elizabeth is saying Oriental drugs, a visionary indeed, and she's sent. If one person shares to at least one, let's make a Ravi love chain. Spread the message, spread the love. And then Rama Amit is watching. Sumit Malik is watching. Then Krishan Tandon. I still remember Panditji's known smile when I first saw him in Delhi in 1980s. And Neil Jain from Rajasthan, from India, is saying, as a student of Indian classical music and also a collector of recordings of the great masters, the contribution of Navras Records is significant. Nirav Vaidya, that's an amazing trivia. Thanks for sharing. Ibadul Haq, he's a disciple of Deepak Chaudhary, Guruji's wonderful disciple. Ibadul Bhai is joining from Dhaka, Bangladesh. Then Peter Grimes, very good. Elizabeth, lovely name. Elizabeth, that was my mother's name. Satish Vyasji is saying he presented that 50-beat tal called Swarna Tal at NCPS Tata Theatre with Zakir Bhai on tabla in 1997. Kumar Acharya, being part of recording of Gandhi, was an experience from 1 to 9 January 1982 at the CTS studio. Then we have more. Then Satishji is saying Panditji's contribution to the film music is absolutely unparalleled. The songs of Anuradha film are so melodious and evergreen. And so many other messages. He was extremely disciplined and punctual, always valued time. And Sukanya ji is saying from London, both Anushka and I are enjoying very much. And then Neil Jain is saying, I'm Neil Jain from Indore, Madhya Pradesh, not speak make Rajasthan. Sorry, Neil bhai. I just, it was my mistake. And I remember coming to Madhya Pradesh and performing for you. Thank you very much. So a lot of wonderful people are watching. And
thank you very much. Talking of film music, I mean, the songs of Anuradha are just sensational. There's no other word for it. They are just they really hit you right there. I mean, your musical sensibilities are so affected by the power of that music. It's just amazing. And, sometimes I wish he'd done more of this music because it's so fantastic stuff that's there. And, his songs are beautiful too. And I think that the idea that somebody can have such an ability to go beyond his immediate field and have as strong an impact is really quite something. When we were doing this whole concept of Navras, my aspiration was, it was primarily from the perspective of the listener, like myself. If I enjoyed something, I want to be able to feel that other people would enjoy it, and that's what I wanted to present, bring it out. And I always had this notion in Indian classical music is as a listener also, it is a very demanding thing. It's new musicians. What you do with such perfection requires so many years and years and years of sadhana to be able to be so perfect. So I don't even need to stress that. But even as a listener, to get the maximum out of it, it requires an effort. It's not a casual experience. And in my opinion, I always used to think about, in the old days, you had those radios where you had to dial and you had to fiddle around with the dial till you found the station. And then, you tune the station, then you could get a good quality sound being broadcast on the station. Well, I always related that concept to that of an artist performing and a person in the audience listening. If you are not on the same bandwidth, you are not going to get the proper quality of what that person is giving.
Fine tuning.
Fine tuning. You have to be absolutely on that. And therefore, there are times when you will not be on it, and that experience will not have the same impact. And other times when you listen to it again and you're completely there, it has a completely new feeling about it. And I think listening to classical music has that thing that you have to be focused and concentrated on what you're being presented with. And I think his ability was to do it on a mass scale, to get an entire, his experience in America when he went out there and performed in the, in the various famous venues that he did. It's not very easy for an instrument that is not that loud to be able to capture the attention of everybody that he did, and to touch different cultural sensibilities. Of course, he was very astute to recognize that what appeals more to the Western audience is a combination of emphasis on rhythm as much as anything else. And he's changed the whole presentation style. I think the concept of rhythm in instrumental music in particular was never quite the same until he changed that. And today, it may have been applied initially for the Western audience, but it's now become generic, hasn't it?
Absolutely. He defined that. He defined the presentation and also the variety of rags, variety of compositions. Of course, he was a master of rhythm, and he introduced so many new tals and, rhythmic compositions and variations and laikari and so much. Absolutely. Vibhaker bhai, thank you very much. What a pleasure it has been to have you on the show, Reflections, and be part of this celebration of our Guru, Bharat Ratna Pandit Ravi Shankar ji. And look forward to seeing you soon, and you stay well and stay safe. Thank you for coming and giving us this time, Vibhaker bhai.
For the wonderful work you're doing in this very, very wonderful cause. So the world gets to know more and more about Panditji and his disciples. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share that with you.
Thank you so much, Vibhaker bhai. It was very nice listening to the conversation and sharing the memories of Panditji to the viewers of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation. Good night. And good night, Gaurav da, once again.
Thank you, Nabarun. Thank you.
Thanks to the viewers of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation. Do join us on our special episode on 26th of January, Republic Day special, with one of the eminent artists who sung the famous songs like Chitti Aayi Hai and Ghungaru Toot Gaye and many more. Till then, goodbye and stay safe.